Hello, I am Jennylyn, and today I am going to be speaking with another amazing woman, and her name is Terri Griffith, and she is a professor, and she's written a book apart from her amazing life that she's led, and so I'm looking forward to having her share the details of all her wonderful experiences with us. Thank you so much for coming, Terri.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I don't know where to begin because I was reading about you and there's so much to share and we only have a half an hour. But I'll try to get to the real juicy bits that I read about.
All right.
So, thank you for coming. And you've been a professor for most of your life?
I have been a professor, it feels like forever, but only because it's a grading week for me. Usually it's a lovely thing. No, I think I started as a faculty member at the University of Arizona in 1989.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what do you think has made you so successful?
I generally say diligence. And now that I'm back in the Silicon Valley, I feel like it's diligence, but combined with an openness to new ideas and new people, because that's where all these ideas are coming from, and you never know where to expect them.
Right. Well, you say back in the Silicon Valley, and when I was doing my research on you, I saw that you traveled around the world.
Yeah.
And you were teaching in some other countries. Do you want to share some of those with us?
Absolutely. I had the chance to teach in Thailand, and so that was about a 6-week stint and had a couple of different classes of students. I've taught in, Israel, in Ph.D, Hungary, and Bulgaria. And Bulgaria was really interesting because it was right after the dissolution of the Soviet Republic.
Okay.
And so they were having to build a country and rebuild their universities. And so we were in there trying to help them do that.
That's great. So do you speak all those languages?
I speak English somewhat well.
That's funny because usually people ask me, because I have a bit of an accent, I'm not from here, you know how many languages I speak, and I always say English and the language of love, so I get that.
Lovely. Yeah.
So what would you say that you learned in those countries that makes you better at what you do here in this country?
Mm-hmm. Again, I think it's this openness to different ideas, different institutions. When we first got to Bulgaria, I was teaching human resources at the time, and to them, well, they don't have any they didn't at the time have any human resource laws because they were having to rebuild all their laws. And so the kinds of things that we think are just standard aren't standard everywhere, and then learning to look for the reason. You know, why might they have something different going on here, and what could be the benefit taking that back to us? So that interplay, I think, is very important.
Okay. And who would you say is a leader that you really admire, and why?
Oh, you do come in from different directions. Oh, you know, because I was having a great conversation with her over the last few days, I'll say Nilofer Merchant is someone that I certainly admire in this area. She's a woman who's had a startup career, a career in tech, written a book, and now she's gone out on her own being more of a speaker and being able to help other people think about how to, take new chances in their lives. And I think she does a lovely job with it.
Good. Well, since you mentioned her book, you have written a book. And it's called The Plugged-In Manager.
It is, and that's been a great avenue for taking the ideas that I've taught for 25 years and trying to bring them to a broader audience. And it was also a great opportunity to get to talk to people that I might not have otherwise gotten to talk to. I'd been doing that research for so long, but as an academic, people go, oh, you're going to take a lot of my time. It's not going to have a clear benefit to me. But when you say, I have this book contract and we really want to talk about your company and how your company can help others, then much easier to get those interviews. And some of them were absolutely spectacular. Everything from a hospital that has improved its, patient care. People can go home a half day earlier than they used to be. And people go, well, 12 hours, what's that? And I go, have you been in a hospital recently? Those 12 hours matter a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the insurance companies like it too, so it's, beneficial to everyone. But everything from hospitals to startups to, I continue the interviews now, and I got to speak with a fellow in the Oshkosh, Wisconsin school district the other day. And the same things that work in our high-tech companies work for them too.
In Wisconsin?
Even in Wisconsin. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know too much about Wisconsin, but I think from my experience and my travels, there's some things that seem so familiar in almost every state that you visit, like Starbucks and, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But what subjects do you teach? Because I know that you're a professor, but do you teach one subject? Do you teach many subjects?
Yeah, I teach in our MBA program at Santa Clara University.
Okay.
And I teach the core organizational design course, but in a couple different formats, because we have regular night classes and then we have kind of accelerated classes. And then I get to teach technology and innovation management to the same MBA students. And this term, if the class fills, I'll be teaching managing with the internet to our undergraduates. And, you know, at least the few who've signed up so far, they seem very excited about the ideas. So they know the internet's there, but I don't think they think about it as a way to leverage their management skills.
Okay. So a lot of what you've done is work. And obviously when you travel to those other countries, although it was work, what do you do outside of work?
Eat.
That's your eat, but you're not overweight.
Well, I try to eat carefully, and then you're walking so much when you're in those places, right? Because you don't have a car to drive yourself around. But in each of those places, the most fun was getting to go out and find local foods or local places. In the beginning in Bulgaria, and this was in the early 90s, so we're going back quite a way, they had white cheese and yellow cheese. And then when I'd fly out, I'd be going into Switzerland, and I'd go into a cheese store and would just be amazed. You know, there'd be thousands of kinds of cheese in this place. And to think about the differences that food signal, even, you know, the different resources that people can have, the things they have to be able to get to lead their lives. But yeah, food is the one key thing. If I can find a sporting activity, that's great too, but there's always going to be an interesting restaurant.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe your next book should be about how you can just eat all the time when you're not working and not become overweight.
Well, I think one thing that's kind of fun about the book is we wove food and cooking into it, because just like you have to take a technology and an organization and human characteristics to make something wonderful, it's the same way that when we cook, we don't just cook one ingredient.
Right.
We always mix them together, and how you mix them together is really the skill. And so that was the big finding from all the folks I talked to, is the technology, the human pieces, and the organizational practices have to be mixed so carefully and creatively. So, you know, I talk about the differences between being a good cook and being an iron chef. We want to be iron chefs.
And what is the difference?
The cook just follows the recipe and, you know, may think about, well, I don't have this ingredient, so I'll just leave it out. They don't think about why it had to be there. And then the Iron Chef has enough background knowledge that he or she knows I can get away with this kind of a shift, or if I did this one thing differently, then it's going to be an entirely new dish and it will be spectacular. So being willing to take those risks.
Yeah. Well, I just discovered I'm an Iron Chef. I love to cook. And people who've come to my house to dinner have always told me that I'm a good cook.
Yeah.
But I've never used a recipe, except for maybe a couple of desserts. But the majority of what I cook, I just throw together. So when people ask me, how did you make this? I tell them, I can tell you what's in it. I can't tell you the quantities, because one of the reasons I don't use recipes is I hate measuring stuff. It's too tedious, and I just want to get the food done. So that's just the reason why I don't. But since you have been in all these different cultures, and you are American by birth, right? What was your take when you left about the people and their lifestyle there versus us as Americans and how we live here? And did it make you change any part of yourself and what you did? What you normally do in terms of your lifestyle?
Well, you know, when they teach you about speaking or writing, they always say, you know, you've got to know your audience.
Right.
And I think we all think about that, and we say, well, sure, I know my audience. But until you're in that culture that is so different, you don't know how broadly you have to think about your audience. And so in Thailand, I was using an American grading style, and that's generally what the university did, but it was a course that had to do with groups and teams, and so I wanted the group and team members to rate each other. In Thailand, you don't do that, and I put the students in a very tight position because for them to speak back to authority was problematic, and yet I had asked them to do something that was so countercultural that they had to basically elect someone to come and tell me that it just wouldn't work. And
Really?
yeah, it was a huge learning experience for me to think that, well, they hired me, the American, to come in and teach these things,
Yes.
and I really had to rethink, well, what's appropriate in this setting, and where can I make some changes? And I appreciate them letting me know, right? In Bulgaria, like I said, it was very early in the transition, so resources were not available, food wasn't available. And you think about that might be, true for the general population. It was true for the faculty of the university. And someone comes in late to the meeting, and I was, a little annoyed that they'd come late to the meeting. Well, cabbages were available in the town down the road, and if they were going to have food for the week, they had to go then, or
That
they'll
was
be
the
gone.
priority.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, yes, that's the priority. They need to worry about their families first, and so it was a broader understanding of what knowing your audience could possibly mean.
Well, in some cultures, the family is the most important thing to them, is making sure that their children get a really good education. In all of the countries that you've taught and visited, which countries did you feel that was true of, and which countries you felt it was more of a survival attitude, like going for the cabbages versus making sure the kids went to school? Which cultures do you think? Because I grew up in South America, and
Right.
the government insists that the children have to go to school, kind of like they do here.
Right.
And so parents really prioritize making sure you get a good education. But I've also lived in different cultures in the Caribbean where it's really getting up and making sure you survive. That's
Right.
important.
Right.
Not so much going to school, because they still buy into the old belief system that you get married if you're a woman, so you don't really need to be educated.
Right.
Did you see a lot of that while you were traveling?
I think I've been lucky because they've always been university settings.
Okay.
And so the people I was interacting with would have come from families where education was important.
Okay.
And, it's certainly the case in Thailand that there's differences across the different parts of the country in terms of who would have access to education and who wouldn't. But I think I have been lucky, and that usually it's been something that's a big focus.
So then is it safe to say that the reason you wrote your book, The Plugged In Manager, so that you could share those experiences with people?
Absolutely. And the issue for me is if I look at something that is of a beautiful design, you had Steve Wozniak on your show.
I did.
I'm such an admirer of his, and
So am I.
the designs that come out of that company. Those are wonderful, but they're not wonderful just because of the way they look. They're wonderful because of how they work together and how we learn to use them in our day-to-day lives and at work.
Right.
Versus other kinds of situations where you look at a technology and you say, this wasn't built for anyone to use, and how could they have done a better job? So a couple things there is, one, first noticing kind of this stop, look, listen idea, noticing that something's wrong, looking around to see what your alternatives might be, trying something, small changes, trying something, and then listening to the feedback that you get. I think that's a big piece. Then being willing to take the opportunity to try something different, so you feel completely empowered to cook the way you want to cook in your kitchen. We should all feel that empowered when we go to work. If the way they've set up my work isn't a way that's going to help me be successful, let me try and figure out a way that I can adjust it.
I can so relate to that.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's very frustrating sometimes. You work for people and they hired you for certain talents, and then you come on board and then they just take everything you come with and chuck it in the back somewhere, and they tell you how you should do it. So I can relate to that. So having been there, having had those experiences, you have written this book. I hope people read it. Because, I mean, if you really believe, based on what you've seen, that life can be better if you incorporate these principles, beliefs, habits, practices in your daily life. You will have a better life.
Yeah.
People get so locked into the way they do things that any mention of change, they start backing off. And obviously, you and I are people who are not governed by fear of change. And so we've done the things we've done. I haven't done anything half as fascinating as you have, but I'm someone who will do things because I believe it will make me a better person.
Yeah.
And I don't let the fear of doing them and the unknown stop me.
Right.
So are you planning to go to any other countries in the future to continue doing this? So you can write version 2, or is this it? Or are you through with your traveling?
Oh, I'm probably not through with my traveling. I'm actually going to Belize on Monday. But,
Oh, good for you!
But,
to teach?
no, not to teach.
Okay.
I think there's some scuba diving in my future.
Ah.
But when I'm there, I'm always gathering new ideas and to see how people with very different sets of resources, you know, the ocean is so important there, boats are so important. How do those organizations work in a different way? You know, but I think we're in a time where we can have a better chance of success at making changes. You know, when I think about, I started this work really in the early to mid 80s.
Okay.
No, there really wasn't any opportunity for people to make vast changes to the way they did their work. We were looking at people just starting to telecommute, you know, work from home sometimes.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pushback for that. But now we've gotten to the point where people are bringing things like Facebook into the office. And these are the same people who 10 years ago, if we had said, we want you to use this knowledge management tool, would have said, I'm not going to share my knowledge. Well, now we share all the time.
Yes.
And things are different, and I think this is the most exciting time I've seen in my career.
Why do you think people are so resistant to certain things? Do you think it's the fear, lack of knowledge? What do you think it is? You're a teacher, you interact with people probably more than I do. What do you think that is?
You know, I'm a little concerned that at least in some of the ways we teach, we tell them to read this book, take this test, then you're going to get that grade. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're saying, read this book, think about those issues, think about the other things you know about that might be relevant, and challenge what you just read. And, you know, even with the MBA students, they've had so many courses where that wasn't what was expected that it's a frustration for them. And I think we spend a lot of our 10-week quarter saying, no, what we want to do is show where these ideas are wrong, show that where they won't work, talk about how they can be leveraged by something else you learned in another class, and be always thinking about how to mix this stuff together.
Great. So what is a good day for you, and what is a bad day, and why?
A good day is if I can learn something new.
Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
I share that with you. Okay.
Yeah. A bad day is where I see something that I think could be an improvement, and the organization or the group just doesn't see it with me. And worse yet, if they say, that'll get us in trouble. It's like, well, let's get in trouble. And then I have to say to myself, you know your audience. I have tenure. I can probably get in a little bit of trouble. But not everybody, you know, at the university organization does, certainly not people out in the Silicon Valley jobs. But I think if we don't get in a little bit of trouble, we're not going to do great things.
Yeah, I'm always in trouble for the same reason. For the same reason, but that's why I am who I am. So if you had to live your life over again, what would you change?
I grew up in Southern California. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, and the biggest regret I have about that, I didn't learn to sail there. You know, I didn't learn to sail until I was, I don't know, in my 30s, and I lived on the beach.
You did?
I did. I lived on the beach. And so it was only after I left California to go to grad school and take my early jobs that I really got to see, you know, scuba diving, I got to see sailing, I got to take advantage of those things. I could have done that earlier.
Well, you always take things for granted that are right in your backyard. You always think, I can always do it. It's right there.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things I've always wanted to do is go to the Winchester Mystery House. And I've had so many people come here and ask me to go with them. I'm like, no, I can always go. Still haven't gone.
Oh.
So I get that.
Okay.
And so that's your regret. So
Yeah.
are you big on sailing now? Is that something?
I am, and I will say we had a great event earlier in the year. There's a fellow who's put together something called the Pink Boat Challenge to support breast cancer research, and he's running a lot of events. We had a little race. Actually, it turned into a pretty big race. And the way you would win is not only on how fast you went, but how much money you were able to raise. And our boat came in second.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we were
That's
very
huge.
happy about that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what do you want people to know about Terri Griffith?
I want people to know that I'm looking for new ways of applying the ideas that so many people shared with me for the book. And I had the chance to go down to IBM and give a talk a little bit ago where they challenged me to think about when does someone need to learn how to do what I call the stop, look, listen, and the mixing and the sharing, especially the mixing part, bringing together the human attributes, the technical and the organizational. And I did some research on it, a little bit of reading, and I finally came up with the age of 9. 9 is when we need to be thinking about these things. And
Age of 9?
The age of 9.
Why 9?
The average U.S. kid gets their first cell phone at the age of 9.
That's not something you and I knew when we were 9, right?
Not at all, no.
Age of 9?
At the
I
age of
did not
9.
know that.
So at the age of 9, they're having to make choices. They're having to make choices about, do I take the phone with me to the playground? Do I turn the phone on or off in class? Do I use the phone to store information? Now, I'm not sure how sophisticated their phone use is, but they are on computers at that age. They're on computers by the time they're 3. How do we help them think about what good uses are? Because we didn't even grow up with that, so our own experience won't help. So we have to teach them a process rather than facts. And you know, I think that's an interesting shift in the way I've thought about my work, which has mostly been about how do you use technologies effectively in organizations. Well, now I'm saying, how do you use technologies in your life, and how do you explain that to people who don't have to be there for training class?
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing because, I mean, it's obviously a different world now. And just like everything in life, when something new is introduced, it's usually intended for good. But
Yeah.
there are those people out there that will find ways to accomplish the complete opposite.
That's right.
What's the negative part of all this new social media? How is that affecting you as a teacher?
So far, so good. And I think it's because my students are so busy. You know, they have jobs, they have families, and then they come to class. What I fear, and now they're going to have this on tape, what I fear is that Twitter will become the way that they pass notes, and that I'm not going to know what they're thinking, and they're not going to share that with me, but they're going to be sharing it with their classmates, and that I won't get the chance to respond to it. And you know, if we're gonna use those social medias that way, I think we need to be more transparent about how we use it. Maybe they aren't understanding a point. Let me go back and do it again. So let me be part of that process rather than kind of one audience using it one way and me using it another.
Thank you. What would you say to a young woman out there who's kind of a daredevil like you and I hope you don't mind me calling you that.
Yeah.
That's what I call myself, and you sound a lot like me. What would you say to them to encourage them if they want to do some of what you've done, like travel and teach other people and learn other cultures? People look at life now, and of course the economic state of the world is in crisis. And so a lot of people are using that as an excuse to not do anything. Pretty much they say, oh, I can't do this because the economy is bad.
Right.
What would you say to them to encourage them to do it?
Yeah, they've got to take risks. I wrote a blog post last night that was triggered by a woman I met at Women in Consulting, which is a group around here. And she has 20 years of experience being a comedian and doing improvisation, as well as being a marketing guru. And she had written a post that, you know, a couple of years ago, talking about the benefits of being willing to get up on that stage, try something out and fail, And she said, you know, the proportion of women who are in her audience is so much smaller than the proportion of men, and that the women are afraid to take that risk.
Yeah.
And so if they don't take a whole lot of risks, they're not going to have the chance to find that great thing. And so being willing to take the risk, being willing to get up on the stage, that's the only way you're going to find something that's really, really spectacular.
As always, when I'm having a fascinating, fun time learning a lot about somebody, really interesting, time runs out. But before we go, what didn't I ask you that you want people to know about Terri Griffith and her life?
Well, I think I want to go back to that issue of it's our responsibility, those of us who have figured it out, at least to a degree, to think about how do we build new organizations, how do we rebuild the way we do our jobs, how do we help kids know that it's their responsibility to do that. Our companies are more transparent, they have more flexibility. Sometimes we get to make choices, so we have to know how to have the responsibility to make that choice, but also that we can make a good one and make things better.
Great answer. As an educator, and I know that you don't just teach females, you teach males as well. Did you ever regret that that's what you chose to do as a career?
I go back and forth. Sometimes I think something where I would get to be a little bit more active would be fun, but then I think the flexibility in my job lets me do something like go off to Belize and go on a dive trip.
Well, Terri, thank you so much for coming here today and allowing me to learn about you. And if you're interested in reading Terri's book, you can get the details on my website. Thank you so much for watching the Jennylyn Show. Thanks to my crew. Thank you to my viewers. Thank you, everyone, and have a great St. Patrick's Day. This is my attempt to be Irish. Thank you.